The Hunting of the Snark by Lewis Carroll. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. The Hunting of the Snark, An Agony in 8 Fits by Lewis Carroll. Preface. If, and the thing is widely possible, the charge of writing nonsense were ever brought against the author of this brief but instructive poem, it would be based, I feel convinced, on the line in page 4. Then the bowsprit got mixed with the rudder sometimes. In view of this painful possibility, I will not, as I might, appeal indignantly to my other writings as a proof that I am incapable of such a deed. I will not, as I might, point to the strong moral purpose of this poem itself, to the arithmetical principles so cautiously inculcated in it, or to its noble teachings in natural history. I will take the more prosaic course of simply explaining how it happened. The bellman, who was almost morbidly sensitive about appearances, used to have the bowsprit unshipped once or twice a week to be revarnished, and it more than once happened when the time came for replacing it, that no one on board could remember which end of the ship it belonged to. They knew it was not of the slightest use to appeal to the bellman about it. He would only refer to his naval code, and read out in pathetic tones admiralty instructions which none of them had ever been able to understand. So it generally ended in it being fastened on anyhow across the rudder. The helmsman used to stand by with tears in his eyes. He knew it was all wrong, but alas, Rule 42 of the Code, "No one shall speak to the man at the helm," had been completed by the bellman himself with the words, "and the man at the helm shall speak to no one." So remonstrance was impossible, and no steering could be done till the next varnishing day. During these bewildering intervals the ship usually sailed backwards. As this poem is to some extent connected with the lay of the Jabberwock, let me take this opportunity of answering a question that has often been asked me: how to pronounce Sliffy Toves. The I in Sliffy is long as in writhe, and Toves is pronounced so as to rhyme with groves. Again, the first O in Borogroves is pronounced like the O in borrow, so I have heard people try to give it the sound of the O in worry. Such is human perversity. This also seems a fitting occasion to notice the other hard works in that poem. Humpty Dumpty's theory of two meanings packed into one word like a portmanteau seems to me the right explanation for all. For instance, take the two words fuming and furious. Make up your mind that you will say both words, but leave it unsettled which you will first. Now open your mouth and speak. If your thoughts incline ever so little towards fuming, you will say fuming furious. If they turn by even a hair's breadth towards furious, you will say furious fuming. But if you have the rarest of gifts, a perfectly balanced mind, you will say frumious. Supposing that when Pistol uttered the well-known words, "Under which king, Bezonian, speak or die," Justice Shallow had felt certain that it was either William or Richard, but had not been able to settle which, so that he could not possibly say either name before the other. Can it be doubted that rather than die he would have gasped out Rilchium? Fit the first, the landing. "Just the place for a Snark," the bellman cried, as he landed his crew with care, supporting each man on the top of the tide by a finger entwined in his hair. "Just the place for a Snark, I have said it twice, that alone should encourage the crew. Just the place for a Snark, I have said it thrice, what I tell you 3 times is true." The crew was complete. It included a boots, a maker of bonnets and hoods, a barrister brought to arrange their disputes, and a broker to value their goods. A billiard marker whose skill was immense might perhaps have won more than his share, but a banker, engaged at enormous expense, had the whole of their cash in his care. There was also a beaver that paced on the deck, or would sit making lace in the bow, and had often, the bellman said, saved them from the wreck, though none of the sailors knew how. There was one who was famed for the number of things he forgot when he entered the ship, his umbrella, his watch, all his jewels and rings, and the clothes he had brought for the trip. He had 42 boxes, all carefully packed, with his name painted clearly on each, but, since he omitted to mention the fact, they were all left behind on the beach. The loss of his clothes hardly mattered, because he had 7 coats on when he came, with 3 pairs of boots, but the worst of it was, he had wholly forgotten his name. He would answer to "Hi!" or any loud cry, such as "Fry me!" or "Fritter my wig!" to "What do you may call 'em?" or "What was his name?" but especially "Thingamajig." Well, for those who preferred a more forcible word, he had different names from these. His intimate friends called him Candle ends, and his enemies Toasted cheese. His form is ungainly, his intellect small, so the bellman would often remark, but his courage is perfect, and that, after all, is the thing that one needs with a snark. He would joke with hyenas, returning their stare with an impotent wag of the head, and he once went to walk paw in paw with a bear, just to keep up its spirits, he said. He came as a baker, but owned when too late, and it drove the poor bellman half mad. He could only bake bride cake, for which, I may state, no materials were to be had. The last of the crew needs a special remark, though he looked an incredible dunce. He had just one idea, but that one being snark, the good bellman engaged him at once. He came as a butcher, but gravely declared, when the ship had been sailing a week, he could only kill beavers. The bellman looked scared, and was almost too frightened to speak. But at length he explained in a tremulous tone that there was only one beaver on board, and that was a tame one he had of his own, whose death would be deeply deplored. The beaver, who happened to hear the remark, protested with tears in its eyes that not even the rapture of hunting the snark could atone for that dismal surprise. It strongly advised that the butcher should be conveyed in a separate ship, but the bellman declared that that would never agree with the plans he had made for the trip. Navigation was always a difficult art, though with only one ship and one bell, and he feared he must really decline for his part, undertaking another as well. The beaver's best course was, no doubt, to procure a second-hand dagger-proof coat, so the baker advised it, and next to insure its life in some office of note. This the banker suggested, and offered for hire, on moderate terms, or for sale, 2 excellent policies, one against fire, and one against damage from hail. Yet still ever after that sorrowful day, whenever the butcher was by, the beaver kept looking the opposite way, and appeared unaccountably shy. Fit the second, the bellman's speech. The bellman himself they all praised to the skies, such a carriage, such ease and such grace, such solemnity too, one could see he was wise, the moment one looked in his face. He had brought a large map representing the sea, without the least vestige of land, and the crew were much pleased when they found it to be a map they could all understand. What's the good of Mercator's North Poles and Equators, tropic zones and meridian lines? So the bellman would cry, and the crew would reply, they are merely conventional signs. Other maps are such shapes with their islands and capes, but we've got our brave captain to thank. So the crew would protest that he's brought us the best, a perfect and absolute blank. This was charming, no doubt, but they shortly found out that the captain they trusted so well had only one notion for crossing the ocean, and that was to tingle his bell. He was thoughtful and grave, but the orders he gave were enough to bewilder a crew. when he cried, "Steer her to starboard, but keep her head larboard." What on earth was the helmsman to do? Then the bowsprit got mixed with the rudder sometimes, a thing, as the bellman remarked, that frequently happens in tropical climes when a vessel is, so to speak, snarked. But the principal failing occurred in the sailing, and the bellman, perplexed and distressed, said he had hopes at least, when the wind blew due east, that the ship would not travel due west. But the danger was past, they had landed at last, with their boxes, portmanteaus, and bags, yet at first sight the crew were not pleased with the view, which consisted of chasms and crags. The bellman perceived that their spirits were low, and repeated in musical tone some jokes he had kept for a season of woe, but the crew would do nothing but groan. He served out some grog with a liberal hand, and bade them sit down on the beach, and they could not but own that their captain looked grand, as he stood and delivered his speech. "Friends, Romans, and countrymen, lend me your ears." They were all of them fond of quotations. So they drank to his health, and they gave him 3 cheers, while he served out additional rations. "We have sailed many months, we have sailed many weeks, 4 weeks to the month you may mark, but never as yet, 'tis your captain who speaks, have we caught the least glimpse of a snark. We have sailed many weeks, we have sailed many days, 7 days to the week I allow, but a snark, on the which we might lovingly gaze, we have never beheld till now. Come listen, my men, while I tell you again the 5 unmistakable marks, by which you may know, wheresoever you go, the warranted genuine snarks. Let us take them in order. The first is the taste, which is meagre and hollow, but crisp, like a coat that is rather too tight in the waist, with a flavour of will-o'-the-wisp. Its habit of getting up late, you'll agree, that it carries too far when I say that it frequently breakfasts at 5 o'clock tea, and dines the following day. The third is its slowness in taking a jest. Should you happen to venture on one, it will sigh like a thing that is deeply distressed, and it always looks grave at a pun. The fourth is its fondness for bathing machines, which it constantly carries about, and believes that they add to the beauty of scenes, a sentiment open to doubt. The fifth is ambition. It next will be right to describe each particular batch, distinguishing those that have features and bite, and those that have whiskers and scratch. For although common snarks do no manner of harm, yet I feel it my duty to say, some are bosom. The bellman broke off in alarm, for the baker had fainted away. Fit the third, the baker's tale. They roused him with muffins, they roused him with ice, they roused him with mustard and cress, they roused him with jam and judicious advice, they set him conundrums to guess. When at length he sat up and was able to speak, his sad story he offered to tell, and the bellman cried silence, not even a shriek, and excitedly tingled his bell. There was silence supreme, not a shriek, not a scream, scarcely even a howl or a groan, as the man they called Ho told his story of woe in an antediluvian tone. My father and mother were honest though poor. Skip all that, cried the bellman in haste. If it once becomes dark, there's no chance of a snark. We have hardly a minute to waste. I skip 40 years, said the baker in tears, and proceed without further remark, to the day when you took me aboard of your ship to help you in hunting the snark. A dear uncle of mine, after whom I was named, remarked when I bade him farewell. Oh, skip your dear uncle, the bellman exclaimed, as he angrily tingled his bell. He remarked to me then, said that mildest of men, if your snark be a snark, that is right. Fetch it home by all means, you may serve it with greens, and it's handy for striking a light. You may seek it with thimbles, and seek it with care, you may hunt it with forks and hope, You may threaten its life with a railway share, you may charm it with smiles and soap. That's exactly the method, the bellman bold in a hasty parenthesis cried. That's exactly the way I have always been told that the capture of snarks should be tried. But, O beamish nephew, beware of the day, if your snark be a bosom, for then you will softly and suddenly vanish away, and never be met with again. It is this that oppresses my soul, when I think of my uncle's last words, and my heart is like nothing so much as a bowl brimming over with quivering curds. It is this, we have had that before, the bellman indignantly said, and the baker replied, let me say it once more. It is this that I dread. I engage with the snark every night after dark in a dreamy, delirious fight. I serve it with greens in those shadowy scenes, and I use it for striking a light. But if ever I meet with a bosom that day, in a moment of this I am sure, I shall softly and suddenly vanish away, and the notion I cannot endure. Fit the fourth, the hunting. The bellman looked huffish and wrinkled his brow. If only you'd spoken before. It's excessively awkward to mention it now, with the snark, so to speak, at the door. We should all of us grieve, as you well may believe, if you never were met with again. But surely, my man, when the voyage began, you might have suggested it then. It's excessively awkward to mention it now, as I think I've already remarked. And the man they called High replied with a sigh, I informed you the day we embarked. You may charge me with murder or want of sense. We are all of us weak at times. But the slightest approach to a false pretence was never among my crimes. I said it in Hebrew, I said it in Dutch, I said it in German and Greek, but I wholly forgot, and it vexes me much, that English is what you speak. 'Tis a pitiful tale, said the bellman, whose face had grown longer at every word. But now that you've stated the whole of your case, more debate would be simply absurd. The rest of my speech, he explained to his men, you shall hear when I've leisure to speak it. But the snark is at hand, let me tell you again, 'tis your glorious duty to seek it. To seek it with thimbles, to seek it with care, to pursue it with forks and hope, to threaten its life with a railway share, to charm it with smiles and soap. For the snark is a peculiar creature that won't be caught in a commonplace way. Do all that you know, and try all that you don't, not a chance must be wasted today. For England expects, I forbear to proceed, 'tis a maxim tremendous but trite, and you best be unpacking the things that you need, to rig yourselves out for the fight. Then the banker endorsed a blank cheque, which he crossed, and changed his loose silver for notes. The baker with care combed his whiskers and hair, and shook the dust out of his coats. The boots and the broker were sharpening a spade, each working the grindstone in turn. But the beaver went on making lace, and displayed no interest in the concern, though the barrister tried to appeal to its pride, and vainly proceeded to cite a number of cases in which making laces had been proved an infringement of right. The maker of bonnets ferociously planned a novel arrangement of bows, while the billiard marker with quivering hand was chalking the tip of his nose. But the butcher turned nervous and dressed himself fine, with yellow kid gloves and a ruff, said he felt it exactly like going to dine, which the bellman declared was all stuff. Introduce me now, there's a good fellow, he said, if we happen to meet it together. And the bellman sagaciously nodding his head, said that must depend on the weather. The beaver went simply gallumping about at seeing the butcher so shy, and even the baker, though stupid and stout, made an effort to wink with one eye. Be a man, said the bellman in wrath, as he heard the butcher beginning to sob. Should we meet with a jub-jub, that desperate bird, we shall need all our strength for the job. Fit the fifth, the beaver's lesson. They sought it with thimbles, they sought it with care, they pursued it with forks and hope. They threatened its life with a railway share, they charmed it with smiles and soap. Then the butcher contrived an ingenious plan for making a separate sally, and had fixed on a spot unfrequented by man, a dismal and desolate valley. But the very same plan to the beaver occurred, it had chosen the very same place, yet neither betrayed by a sign or a word the disgust that appeared in his face. Each thought he was thinking of nothing but snack, and the glorious work of the day, and each tried to pretend that he did not remark that the other was going that way. But the valley grew narrow and narrower still, and the evening got darker and colder, till, merely from nervousness, not from good will, they marched along shoulder to shoulder. Then a scream, shrill and high, rent the shundering sky, and they knew that some danger was near. The beaver turned pale to the tip of its tail, and even the butcher felt queer. He thought of his childhood, left far, far behind, that blissful and innocent state. The sound so exactly recalled to his mind a pencil that squeaks on a slate. "'Tis the voice of the Jubjub," he suddenly cried, this man that they used to call Duns. "As the bellman would tell you," he added with pride, "I have uttered that sentiment once. 'Tis the note of the Jubjub, keep count I entreat, you will find I have told it you twice. 'Tis the song of the Jubjub, the proof is complete, if only I have stated it thrice." The beaver had counted with scrupulous care, attending to every word, but it fairly lost heart, and outgave in despair, when the third repetition occurred. It felt that in spite of all possible pains it had somehow contrived to lose count, and the only thing now was to rack its poor brains by reckoning up the amount. "Two added to one, if that could but be done," it said with one's fingers and thumbs, recollecting with tears how in earlier years it had taken no pain with its sums. "The thing can be done," said the butcher, "I think. The thing must be done, I am sure. The thing shall be done. Bring me paper and ink, the best there is time to procure." The beaver brought paper, portfolio, pens, and ink in unfailing supplies, while strange creepy creatures came out of their dens and watched them with wondering eyes. So engrossed was the butcher, he heeded them not, as he wrote with a pen in each hand, and explained all the while in a popular style which the beaver could well understand. "Taking 3 as the subject to reason about, a convenient number to state, we add 7 and 10, and then multiply out by 1000 diminished by 8. The result we proceed to divide, as you see, by 992. Then subtract 17, and the answer must be exactly and perfectly true. The method employed I would gladly explain, while I have it so clear in my head, if I had but the time, and you had but the brain, but much yet remains to be said. In one moment I've seen what has hitherto been enveloped in absolute mystery, and without extra charge I will give you at large a lesson in natural history." In his genial way he proceeded to say, forgetting all laws of propriety, and that giving instruction without introduction would cause quite a thrill in society. "As to temper, the Jubjub's a desperate bird, since it lives in perpetual passion. Its taste in costume is entirely absurd, it is ages ahead of the fashion. But it knows any friend it has met once before, it never will look at a bribe, and in charity meetings it stands at the door and collects, though it does not subscribe. Its flavour when cooked is more exquisite far than mutton or oysters or eggs. Some thinks it keeps best in an ivory jar, and some in mahogany kegs. You boil it in sawdust, you salt it in glue, you condense it with locusts and tape, still keeping one principal object in view, to preserve its symmetrical shape." The butcher would gladly have taught till next day, but he felt that the lesson must end, and he wept with delight in attempting to say he considered the beaver his friend, while the beaver confessed with affectionate looks more eloquent even than tears, It had learned in 10 minutes far more than all books would have taught it in 70 years. They returned hand in hand, and the bellman unmanned for a moment with noble emotion, said this amply repays all the wearisome days we have spent on the billowy ocean. Such friends as the beaver and butcher became have seldom if ever been known. In winter or summer 'twas always the same, you could never meet either alone. And when quarrels arose, as one frequently finds quarrels will, spite of every endeavour, the song of the Jubjub recurred to their minds, and cemented their friendship for ever. Fit the 6th. The Barrister's Dream. They sought it with thimbles, they sought it with care, they pursued it with forks and hope. They threatened its life with a railway share, they charmed it with smiles and soap. But the barrister, weary of proving in vain that the beaver's lace-making was wrong, fell asleep, and in dreams saw the creature quite plain that his fancy had dwelt on so long. He dreamed that he stood in a shadowy court, where the Snark with a glass in its eye, dressed in gown, bands, and wig, was defending a pig on the charge of deserting its sty. The witnesses proved without error or flaw that the sty was deserted when found, and the judge kept explaining the state of the law in a soft undercurrent of sound. The indictment had never been clearly expressed, and it seemed that the Snark had begun, and had spoken 3 hours before anyone guessed what the pig was supposed to have done. The jury had each formed a different view long before the indictment was read, and they all spoke at once, so that none of them knew one word that the others had said. "You must know," said the judge. But the Snark explained, "Fudge! That statute is obsolete quite. Let me tell you, my friends, that the whole question depends on an ancient manorial right. In the matter of treason the pig would appear to have aided but scarcely abetted. While the charge of insolvency fails, it is clear, if you grant the plea, never indebted. The fact of desertion I will not dispute, but its guilt, as I trust, is removed, so far as related to the cost of this suit, by the alibi which has been proved. My poor client's fate now depends on your votes." Here the speaker sat down in his place, and directed the judge to refer to his notes and briefly to sum up the case. But the judge said he never had summed up before, so the Snark undertook it instead, and summed it so well that it came to far more than the witnesses ever had said. When the verdict was called for, the jury declined, as the word was so puzzling to spell, but they venturing to hope that the Snark wouldn't mind undertaking that duty as well. So the Snark found the verdict, although, as it owned, it was spent with the toils of the day. When it said the word "guilty," the jury all groaned, and some of them fainted away. Then the Snark pronounced sentence, the judge being quite too nervous to utter a word. When it rose to its feet, there was silence like night, and the fall of a pin might be heard. "Transportation for life," was the sentence it gave, "and then to be fined £40. The jury all cheered, though the judge said he feared that the phrase was not legally sound. But their wild exultation was suddenly checked when the gaoler informed them with tears such a sentence would have not the slightest effect, as the pig had been dead for some years. The judge left the court looking deeply disgusted, but the Snark, though a little aghast, as the lawyer to whom the defence was entrusted went bellowing on to the last. Thus the barrister dreamed, while the bellowing seemed to grow every moment more clear, till he woke to the keel of a furious bell, which the bellman rang close to his ear. Fit the 7th. The Baker's Fate. They sought it with thimbles, they sought it with care, they pursued it with forks and hope. They threatened its life with a railway share, they charmed it with smiles and soap. And the banker, inspired with a courage so new, it was matter for general remark, rushed madly ahead, and was lost to their view in his zeal to discover the Snark. But while he was seeking with thimbles and care, a bandersnatch swiftly drew nigh, and grabbed at the banker, who shrieked in despair, for he knew it was useless to fly. He offered large discount, he offered a cheque, drawn to bearer, for £7.10, but the Bandersnatch merely extended its neck and grabbed at the banker again, without rest or pause, while those furious jaws went savagely snapping around. He skipped and he hoped, and he floundered and flopped, till fainting he fell to the ground. The Bandersnatch fled as the others appeared, led on by that fear-stricken yell, and the bellman remarked, "It is just as I feared," and solemnly tolled on his bell. He was black in the face, and they scarcely could trace the least likeness to what he had been, while so great was his fright that his waistcoat turned white, a wonderful thing to be seen. To the horror of all who were present that day, he uprose in full evening dress, and with senseless grimaces endeavoured to say what his tongue could no longer express. Down he sank in a chair, ran his hands through his hair, and chanted in mimious tones words whose utter inanity proved his insanity, while he rattled a couple of bones. "Leave him here to his fate, it is getting so late," the bellman exclaimed in a fright. "We have lost half the day, any further delay, and we shan't catch a snack before night." Fit the 8th. The Vanishing. They sought it with thimbles, they sought it with care, they pursued it with forks and hope. They threatened its life with a railway share, they charmed it with smiles and soap. They shuddered to think that the chase might fail, and the beaver, excited at last, went bounding along on the tip of its tail, for the daylight was nearly past. "There is Thingumbo shouting," the bellman said. "He is shouting like mad, only hark! He is waving his hands, he is wagging his head, he has certainly found a snark." They gazed in delight, while the butcher explained, "He was always a desperate wag." They beheld him, their baker, their hero unnamed, on the top of a neighbouring crag, erect and sublime, for one moment of time. In the next, that wild figure they saw, as if stung by a spasm, plunge into a chasm, while they waited and listened in awe. "It's a snark!" was the sound that first came to their ears, and seemed almost too good to be true. Then followed a torrent of laughter and cheers, then the ominous words, "It's a boo!" Then silence. Some fancied they heard in the air a weary and wandering sigh that sounded like "jum," but others declared it was only a breeze that went by. They hunted till darkness came on, but they found not a button or feather or mark, by which they could tell that they stood on the ground where the baker had met with the snark. In the midst of the word he was trying to say, in the midst of his laughter and glee, he had softly and suddenly vanished away, for the snark was a boojum, you see. End of The Hunting of the Snark by Lewis Carroll.
How Old Mr. Mink Taught Himself to Swim by Thornton W. Burgess. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Of all the little people who live in the Green Forest, or on the Green Meadows, or around the Smiling Pool, Billy Mink has the most accomplishments. At least, it seems that way to his friends and neighbors. He can run very swiftly. He can climb very nimbly. His eyes and his ears and his nose are all wonderfully keen. And he can swim like a fish. Yes, sir, Billy Mink is just as much at home in the water as out of it. So wherever he happens to be, in the Green Forest, out on the Green Meadows, along the Laughing Brook, or in the Smiling Pool, he feels perfectly at home and quite able to look out for himself. Once Billy Mink had boasted that he could do anything that anyone else who wore fur could do. But boasters almost always come to grief. And Grandfather Frog had brought Billy to grief that time. He had invited everyone to meet at the Smiling Pool and see Billy Mink do whatever anyone else who wore fur could do. And then, when Billy had run and jumped and climbed and swum, Grandfather Frog had called Flitter the Bat. There was someone wearing fur who could fly, and of course Billy Mink couldn't do that. It cured Billy of boasting, for a while anyway. Now Peter Rabbit, who can do little but run and jump, used sometimes to feel a wee bit of envy in his heart when he thought of all the things that Billy Mink could do and do well. Somehow, Peter could never make it seem quite right that one person should be able to do so many things when others could do only one or two things. He said as much to Grandfather Frog one day as they watched Billy Mink catch a fat trout.
"Chug-a-rum,"
said Grandfather Frog, and looked sharply at Peter.
"Chug-a-rum. People never know what they can do till they try. Once upon a time, Billy Mink's great-great-ever-so-great-grandfather couldn't swim any more than you can, but he didn't waste any time foolishly wishing that he could."
"What did he do?" asked Peter eagerly.
"Learned how," replied Grandfather Frog gruffly. "Made it his business to learn how. Then he taught his children, and they taught their children, and after a long time it came natural to the Mink family to swim."
"Did it take old Mr. Mink very long to learn how?" asked Peter wistfully.
"Quite a while," replied Grandfather Frog. "Quite a while. Perhaps you would like to hear about it."
"Oh, if you please, Grandfather Frog," cried Peter. "If you please. I should love dearly to hear about it. Perhaps then I can learn to swim." Grandfather Frog snapped up a foolish green fly that happened his way, and Peter heard something that sounded very much like a chuckle. He looked at Grandfather Frog suspiciously. Was that chuckle because of the foolish green fly, or was Grandfather Frog laughing at him? Peter wasn't sure.
"It all happened a long time ago when the world was young, as a great many other things happened," began Grandfather Frog. "Old Mr. Mink, the ever-so-great-grandfather of Billy Mink, couldn't do all the things that Billy can now. For instance, he couldn't swim. But he could do a great many things, and he was very smart. It has always run in the Mink family to be smart. He dressed very much as Billy does now, except that he didn't have the waterproof coat that Billy has. And he was a great traveler, just as Billy is. Everybody smaller than he, and some who were bigger, were a little bit afraid of old Mr. Mink, for he was quite as sly and cunning as Mr. Fox, and it was suspected that he knew a great deal more than he ever admitted about eggs that were stolen, and nests that were broken up, and other strange things that happened in the Green Forest and along the Laughing Brook. But he never was caught doing anything wrong, and always seemed to be minding his own business. So, all things considered, he got along very well with his neighbors. Now Mr. Mink was small and spry, and his wits were as nimble as his feet. He saw all that was going on about him, and he was wise enough to keep his tongue still, so that it never got him into trouble, as gossipy tongues do some people I know."
Peter Rabbit fidgeted uneasily. It seemed to him that Grandfather Frog had looked at him very hard when he said this. But Grandfather Frog just cleared his throat and went on with his story.
"Yes, sir. Old Mr. Mink kept his eyes wide open and his ears wide open, and the wits in his little brown head always working. He noticed that those who were fussy about what they ate and insisted on having a special kind of food often went hungry, or had to hunt long and hard to find what they liked. So he made up his mind to learn to eat many kinds of food. This is how it happens that he learned to like fish. His big cousin, Mr. Otter, often caught a bigger fish than he could eat all himself, and would leave some of it on the bank. Mr. Mink would find it and help himself. But having to depend on Mr. Otter to get the fish for him didn't suit Mr. Mink at all. In the first place, he didn't have as much as he wanted, and then again he didn't have it when he wanted it. If I could learn to catch fish for myself, I would be much better off, thought Mr. Mink. After this he spent a great deal of time on the banks of the Smiling Pool, watching Mr. Otter swim to see just how he did it. If he can swim, I can swim, said Mr. Mink to himself, and went off up the Laughing Brook to a quiet little pool where the water was not deep. At first he didn't like it at all. The water got in his ears and up his nose and choked him. And then it was so dreadfully wet. But he would grit his teeth and keep at it. After a while he got so that he could paddle around a little. Gradually he lost his fear of the water. Then he found that because he naturally moved so quickly, he could sometimes catch foolish minnows who swam in where the water was very shallow. Oh, this was great sport, and he quite often had fish for dinner now. But he wasn't satisfied. No, sir, he wasn't satisfied. Whatever Mr. Mink did, he wanted to do well. He could run well and climb well, and there was no better hunter in all the Green Forest. He was bound that he would swim well. So he kept trying and trying. He learned to fill his lungs with air and hold his breath for a long time, while he swam as fast as ever he could with his head under water, as he had seen his cousin Mr. Otter swim. The more he did this, the longer he could hold his breath. After a while he found that because he was slim and trim and moved so fast, he could outswim Mr. Muskrat, and this made him feel very good indeed, for Mr. Muskrat spent nearly all his time in the water and was accounted a very good swimmer. There was only one thing that bothered Mr. Mink. The water was so dreadfully wet. Every time he came out of it, he had to run his hardest to dry off and keep from getting cold. This was very tiresome, and he did wish that there was an easier way of drying off. Then came the bad time, the sad time, when food was scarce, and most of the little people in the Green Forest and on the Green Meadow went hungry. But Mr. Mink didn't go hungry. Oh, my, no! You see, he had learned to catch fish, and so he had plenty to eat. When old Mother Nature came to see how all the little people were getting along, she was very much surprised to find that Mr. Mink had become a famous swimmer. She watched him catch a fish. Then she watched him run about to dry off and keep from getting cold, and her eyes twinkled. "He who helps himself deserves to be helped," said old Mother Nature. Mr. Mink didn't know what she meant by that, but the next morning he found out. Yes, sir, the next morning he found out. He found that he had a brand new coat over his old one, and the new one was waterproof. He could swim as much as he pleased and not get the least bit wet, because the water couldn't get through that new coat. And ever since that long ago day when the world was young, the minks have had waterproof coats and have been famous fishermen. "Hello, Peter Rabbit! What under the sun are you trying to do, swelling yourself up that way?"
I was just practicing holding my breath," replied Peter, and looked very, very foolish.
"Oh," laughed Grandfather Frog. "You can't learn to swim by holding your breath on dry land, Peter Rabbit."
End of How Old Mr. Mink Taught Himself to Swim by Thornton W. Burgess. Read by Antoinette Griffin.
The Princess and the Pea by Hans Christian Andersen. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. Once upon a time there was a prince who wanted to marry a princess, but she would have to be a real princess. He traveled all over the world to find one, but nowhere could he get what he wanted. There were princesses enough, but it was difficult to find out whether they were real ones. There was always something about them that was not as it should be. So he came home again and was sad, for he would have liked very much to have a real princess. One evening a terrible storm came on. There was thunder and lightning, and the rain poured down in torrents. Suddenly a knocking was heard at the city gate, and the old king went to open it. It was a princess standing out there in front of the gate. But good gracious, what a sight the rain and the wind had made her look! The water ran down from her hair and clothes. It ran down into the toes of her shoes and out again at the heels. And yet she said she was a real princess. Well, we'll soon find that out, thought the old queen. But she said nothing, went into the bedroom, took all the bedding off the bedstead, and laid a pea on the bottom. Then she took 20 mattresses and laid them on the pea, and then 20 eider-down beds on top of the mattresses. On this the princess had to lie all night. In the morning she was asked how she had slept. "Oh, very badly," said she. "I have scarcely closed my eyes all night. Heaven only knows what was in the bed, but I was laying on something hard, so that I am black and blue all over my body. It's horrible." Now they knew that she was a real princess, because she had felt the pea right through the 20 mattresses and the 20 eider-down beds. Nobody but a real princess could be as sensitive as that. So the prince took her for his wife, for now he knew that he had a real princess, and the pea was put in the museum, where it may still be seen if no one has stolen it. There, that is a true story. End of The Princess and the Pea by Hans Christian Andersen.
Little Black Sambo, A Tale of India by Helen Bannerman. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. Once upon a time there was a little black boy, and his name was Little Black Sambo, and his mother was called Black Mumbo, and his father was called Black Jumbo, and Black Mumbo made him a beautiful little red coat and a pair of beautiful little blue trousers, and Black Jumbo went to the bazaar and bought him a beautiful green umbrella and a lovely little pair of purple shoes with crimson soles and crimson linings, and then wasn't Little Black Sambo grand? So he put on all his fine clothes and went out for a walk in the jungle, and by he met a tiger, and the tiger said to him, "Little Black Sambo, I'm going to eat you up." And Little Black Sambo said, "Oh, please, Mr. Tiger, don't eat me up, and I'll give you my beautiful little red coat." So the tiger said, "Very well, I won't eat you this time, but you must give me your beautiful little red coat." So the tiger got poor Little Black Sambo's beautiful little red coat, and went away saying, "Now I'm the grandest tiger in the jungle." And Little Black Sambo went on, and by he met another tiger, and it said to him, "Little Black Sambo, I'm going to eat you up." And Little Black Sambo said, "Oh, please, Mr. Tiger, don't eat me up, and I'll give you my beautiful little blue trousers." So the tiger said, "Very well, I won't eat you this time, but you must give me your beautiful little blue trousers." So the tiger got poor Little Black Sambo's beautiful little blue trousers, and went away saying, "Now I'm the grandest tiger in the jungle." And Little Black Sambo went on, and by he met another tiger, and it said to him, "Little Black Sambo, I'm going to eat you up." And Little Black Sambo said, "Oh, please, Mr. Tiger, don't eat me up, and I'll give you my beautiful little purple shoes with crimson soles and crimson linings." But the tiger said, "What use would your shoes be to me? I've got 4 feet, and you've got only 2. You haven't got enough shoes for me." But Little Black Sambo said, "You could wear them on your ears." "So I could," said the tiger. "That's a very good idea. Give them to me, and I won't eat you this time." So the tiger got poor Little Black Sambo's beautiful little purple shoes with crimson soles and crimson linings, and went away saying, "Now I'm the grandest tiger in the jungle." And by Little Black Sambo met another tiger, and it said to him, "Little Black Sambo, I'm going to eat you up." And Little Black Sambo said, "Oh, please, Mr. Tiger, don't eat me up, and I'll give you my beautiful green umbrella." But the tiger said, "How can I carry an umbrella when I need all my paws for walking with?" "You could tie a knot in your tail and carry it that way," said Little Black Sambo. "So I could," said the Tiger. "Give it to me and I won't eat you this time." So he got poor Little Black Sambo's beautiful green umbrella and went away saying, "Now I'm the grandest tiger in the jungle." And poor Little Black Sambo went away crying because the cruel tigers had taken all his fine clothes. Presently he heard a horrible noise that sounded like grrr, and it grew louder and louder. "Oh dear," said Little Black Sambo, "there are all the tigers coming back to eat me up. What shall I do?" So he ran quickly to a palm tree and peeped round it to see what the matter was. And there he saw all the tigers fighting and disputing which of them was the grandest, and at last they all got so angry that they jumped up and took off all the fine clothes and began to tear at each other with their claws and bite each other with their great big white teeth. And they came, rolling and tumbling, right to the foot of the very tree where Little Black Sambo was hiding. But he jumped quickly in behind the umbrella, and the tigers all caught hold of each other's tails, and they wrangled and scrambled, and so they fought themselves in a ring around the tree. Then Little Black Sambo jumped up and called out, "Oh, tigers, why have you taken off all your nice clothes? Don't you want them any more?" But the tigers only answered, "Grrr." Then Little Black Sambo said, "If you want them, say so, or I'll take them away." But the tigers would not let go of each other's tails, and so they could only say, "Grrr." So Little Black Sambo put on all his fine clothes again and walked off, and the tigers were very, very angry, but still they would not let go of each other's tails. And they were so angry that they ran round the tree, trying to eat each other up, and they ran faster and faster till they were whirling around so fast you couldn't see their legs at all. And they still ran faster and faster and faster, till they all just melted away, and there was nothing left but a great big pool of melted butter, or ghee, as it is called in India, round the foot of the tree. Now Black Jumbo was just coming home from his work, with a great big brass pot in his arms, and when he saw what was left of all the tigers, he said, "Oh, what lovely melted butter! I'll take that home to Black Mumbo for her to cook with." So he put it all into a great big brass pot, and took it home to Black Mumbo to cook with. When Black Mumbo saw the melted butter, wasn't she pleased? "Now," said she, "we'll all have pancakes for supper." So she got flour and eggs and milk and sugar and butter, and she made a huge plate of most lovely pancakes, and she fried them in the melted butter which the tigers had made, and they were just as yellow and brown as little tigers. And then they all sat down to supper, and Black Mumbo ate 27 pancakes, and Black Jumbo ate 55, but Little Black Sambo ate 169 because he was so hungry. End of Little Black Sambo, A Tale of India by Helen Bannerman. Read by Amelia Chantarot-Wong.
The Velveteen Rabbit by Marjorie Williams. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. There was once a Velveteen Rabbit, and in the beginning he was really splendid. He was fat and bunchy, as a rabbit should be. His coat was spotted brown and white. He had real thread whiskers, and his ears were lined with pink sateen. On Christmas morning, when he sat wedged in the top of the boy's stocking, with a sprig of holly between his paws, the effect was charming. There were other things in the stocking, nuts and oranges and a toy engine, and chocolate almonds and a clockwork mouse, but the rabbit was quite the best of all. For at least 2 hours the boy loved him, and then aunts and uncles came to dinner, and there was a great rustling of tissue paper and unwrapping of parcels, and in the excitement of looking at all the new presents, the Velveteen Rabbit was forgotten. For a long time he lived in the toy cupboard or on the nursery floor, and no one thought very much about him. He was naturally shy, and being only made of velveteen, some of the more expensive toys quite snubbed him. The mechanical toys were very superior, and looked down upon everyone else. They were full of modern ideas, and pretended they were real. The model boat, who had lived through 2 seasons and lost most of his paint, caught the tone from them, and never missed an opportunity of referring to his rigging in technical terms. The rabbit could not claim to be a model of anything, for he didn't know that real rabbits existed, He thought they were all stuffed with sawdust like himself, and he understood that sawdust was quite out of date and should never be mentioned in modern circles. Even Timothy, the jointed wooden lion who was made by the disabled soldiers, and should have had broader views, put on airs and pretended he was connected with the government. Between them all, the poor little rabbit was made to feel himself very insignificant and commonplace, and the only person who was kind to him at all was the Skin Horse. The Skin Horse had lived longer in the nursery than any of the others. He was so old that his brown coat was bald in patches and showed the seams underneath, and most of the hairs in his tail had been pulled out to string bead necklaces. He was wise, for he had seen a long succession of mechanical toys arrive to boast and swagger, and by break their mainsprings and pass away, and he knew that they were only toys, and would never turn into anything else. For nursery magic is very strange and wonderful, and only those playthings that are old and wise and experienced, like the Skin Horse, understand all about it. "What is real?" asked the rabbit one day when they were lying side by side near the nursery fender before Nana came to tidy the room. "Does it mean having things that buzz inside you and a stick-out handle?" "Real isn't how you are made," said the Skin Horse. "It's a thing that happens to you. When a child loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you, then you become real." "Does it hurt?" asked the rabbit. "Sometimes," said the Skin Horse, for he was always truthful. "When you are real, you don't mind being hurt." "Does it happen all at once, like being wound up?" he asked, "or bit by bit?" "It doesn't happen all at once," said the Skin Horse. "You become. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't happen often to people who break easily, or have sharp edges, or who have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off, and your eyes drop out, and you get loose in the joints, and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you are real you can't be ugly, except to people who don't understand." "I suppose you are real?" said the rabbit, and then he wished he had not said it, for he thought the Skin Horse might be sensitive. But the Skin Horse only smiled. "The boy's uncle made me real," he said. "That was a great many years ago. But once you are real you can't become unreal again. It lasts for always." The rabbit sighed. He thought it would be a long time before this magic called real happened to him. He longed to become real, to know what it felt like. And yet the idea of growing shabby and losing his eyes and whiskers was rather sad. He wished that he could become it without these uncomfortable things happening to him. There was a person called Nana who ruled the nursery. Sometimes she took no notice of the playthings lying about, and sometimes, for no reason whatever, she went swooping about like a great wind and hustled them away in cupboards. She called this tidying up, and the playthings all hated it, especially the tin ones. The rabbit didn't mind it so much, for wherever he was thrown he came down soft. One evening when the boy was going to bed he couldn't find the china dog that always slept with him. Nana was in a hurry, and it was too much trouble to hunt for china dogs at bedtime, so she simply looked about her, and seeing that the toy cupboard door stood open, she made a swoop. "Here," she said, "take your old Bunny. He'll do to sleep with you." And she dragged the rabbit out by one ear and put him into the boy's arms. That night, and for many nights after, the Velveteen Rabbit slept in the boy's bed. At first he found it rather uncomfortable, for the boy hugged him very tight, and sometimes he rolled over on him, and sometimes he pushed him so far under the pillow that the rabbit could scarcely breathe. And he missed, too, those long moonlight hours in the nursery when all the house was silent, and his talks with the Skin Horse. But very soon he grew to like it, for the boy used to talk to him, and made nice tunnels for him under the bedclothes that he said were like the burrows the real rabbits lived in. And they had splendid games together, in whispers, when Nana had gone away to her supper, and left the night-light burning on the mantelpiece. And when the boy dropped off to sleep, the rabbit would snuggle down close under his little warm chin, and dream, with the boy's hands clasped close round him all night long. And so time went on, and the little rabbit was very happy, so happy that he never noticed how his beautiful velveteen fur was getting shabbier and shabbier, and his tail becoming unsewn, and all the pink rubbed off his nose where the boy had kissed him. Spring came, and they had long days in the garden, for wherever the boy went, the rabbit went too. He had rides in the wheelbarrow, and picnics on the grass, and lovely fairy huts built for him under the raspberry canes behind the flower border. And once, when the boy was called away suddenly to go out to tea, the rabbit was left out on the lawn until long after dusk, and Nana had to come and look for him with the candle, because the boy couldn't go to sleep unless he was there. He was wet through with the dew, and quite earthy from diving into the burrows the boy had made for him in the flower bed, and Nana grumbled as she rubbed him off with the corner of her apron. "You must have your old Bunny," she said. "Fancy all that fuss for a toy!" The boy sat up in bed and stretched out his hands. "Give me my Bunny," he said. "You mustn't say that. He isn't a toy. He's real." When the little rabbit heard that he was happy, for he knew that what the Skin Horse had said was true at last. The nursery magic had happened to him, and he was a toy no longer. He was real. The boy himself had said it. That night he was almost too happy to sleep, and so much love stirred in his little sawdust heart that it almost burst. And into his boot-button eyes, that had long ago lost their polish, there came a look of wisdom and beauty, so that even Nana noticed it next morning when she picked him up and said, "I declare, if that old Bunny hasn't got quite a knowing expression." That was a wonderful summer. Near the house where they lived there was a wood, and in the long June evenings the boy liked to go there after tea to play. He took the Velveteen Rabbit with him, and before he wandered off to pick flowers, or play at brigands among the trees, he always made the rabbit a little nest somewhere among the bracken, where he would be quite cosy, for he was a kind-hearted little boy, and he liked Bunny to be comfortable. One evening, while the rabbit was lying there alone, watching the ants that ran to and fro between his velvet paws in the grass, he saw two strange beings creep out of the tall bracken near him. They were rabbits like himself, but quite furry and brand new. They must have been very well made, for their seams didn't show at all, and they changed shape in a queer way when they moved. One minute they were long and thin, and the next minute fat and bunchy, instead of always staying the same like he did. Their feet padded softly on the ground, and they crept quite close to him, twitching their noses, while the rabbit stared hard to see which side the clockwork stuck out, for he knew that people who jump generally have something to wind them up. But he couldn't see it. They were evidently a new kind of rabbit altogether. They stared at him, and the little rabbit stared back, and all the time their noses twitched. "Why don't you get up and play with us?" one of them asked. "I don't feel like it," said the rabbit, for he didn't want to explain that he had no clockwork. "Ho!" said the furry rabbit. "It's as easy as anything." And he gave a big hop sideways and stood on his hind legs. "I don't believe you can," he said. "I can," said the little rabbit. "I can jump higher than anything." He meant when the boy threw him, but of course he didn't want to say so. "Can you hop on your hind legs?" asked the furry rabbit. That was a dreadful question, for the Velveteen Rabbit had no hind legs at all. The back of him was made all in one piece like a pincushion. He sat still in the bracken and hoped that the other rabbits wouldn't notice. "I don't want to," he said again. But the wild rabbits have very sharp eyes, and this one stretched out his neck and looked. "He hasn't got any hind legs!" he called out. "Fancy a rabbit without any hind legs!" And he began to laugh. "I have!" cried the little rabbit. "I have got hind legs. I am sitting on them." "Then stretch them out and show me, like this," said the wild rabbit. And he began to whirl round and dance, till the little rabbit got quite dizzy. "I don't like dancing," he said. "I'd rather sit still." But all the while he was longing to dance, for a funny new tickly feeling ran through him, and he felt he would give anything in the world to be able to jump about like these rabbits did. The strange rabbit stopped dancing, and came quite close. He came so close this time that his long whiskers brushed the Velveteen Rabbit's ear, and then he wrinkled his nose suddenly and flattened his ears and jumped backwards. "He doesn't smell right!" he exclaimed. "He isn't a rabbit at all! He isn't real!" "I am real!" said the little Rabbit. "I am real! The boy said so!" And he nearly began to cry. Just then there was a sound of footsteps, and the boy ran past near them, and with a stamp of feet and a flash of white tails the two strange rabbits disappeared. "Come back and play with me!" called the little Rabbit. "Oh, do come back! I know I am real!" But there was no answer, only the little ants ran to and fro, and the bracken swayed gently where the two strangers had passed. The Velveteen Rabbit was all alone. "Oh dear!" he thought. "Why did they run away like that? Why couldn't they stop and talk to me?" For a long time he lay very still, watching the bracken, and hoping that they would come back. But they never returned, and presently the sun sank lower, and the little white moths fluttered out, and the boy came and carried him home. Weeks passed, and the little Rabbit grew very old and shabby, but the boy loved him just as much. He loved him so hard that he loved all his whiskers off, and the pink lining to his ears turned grey, and his brown spots faded. He even began to lose his shape, and he scarcely looked like a rabbit any more, except to the boy. To him he was always beautiful, and that was all that the little Rabbit cared about. He didn't mind how he looked to other people, because the nursery magic had made him real, and when you are real, shabbiness doesn't matter. And then, one day, the boy was ill. His face grew flushed, and he talked in his sleep, and his little body was so hot that it burned the Rabbit when he held him close. Strange people came and went in the nursery, and a light burned all night, and through it all the little Velveteen Rabbit lay there, hidden from sight under the bedclothes, and he never stirred, for he was afraid that if they found him, someone might take him away, and he knew that the boy needed him. It was a long, weary time, for the boy was too ill to play, and the little Rabbit found it rather dull with nothing to do all day. But he snuggled down patiently, and looked forward to the time when the boy should be well again, and when they would go out into the garden amongst the flowers and the butterflies, and play splendid games in the raspberry thicket like they used to. All sorts of delightful things he planned, and while the boy lay half asleep, he crept up close to the pillow and whispered them in his ear. And presently the fever turned, and the boy got better. He was able to sit up in bed and look at picture books, while the little Rabbit cuddled close at his side. And one day they let him get up and dress. It was a bright, sunny morning, and the windows stood wide open. They had carried the boy out onto the balcony, wrapped in a shawl, and the little Rabbit lay tangled up among the bedclothes, thinking. The boy was going to the seaside tomorrow. Everything was arranged, and now it only remained to carry out the doctor's orders. They talked about it all, while the little Rabbit lay under the bedclothes, with just his head peeping out, and listened. The room was to be disinfected, and all the books and toys that the boy had played with in bed must be burnt. "Hurrah!" thought the little Rabbit. "Tomorrow we shall go to the seaside." For the boy had often talked of the seaside, and he wanted very much to see the big waves coming in, and the tiny crabs, and the sand castles. Just then Nana caught sight of him. "How about his old Bunny?" she asked. "That?" said the doctor. "Why, it's a mass of scarlet fever germs. Burn it at once." "What? Nonsense! Get him a new one. He mustn't have that any more." And so the little Rabbit was put into a sack with the old picture books and a lot of rubbish, and carried out to the end of the garden behind the fowl house. That was a fine place to make a bonfire, only the gardener was too busy just then to attend to it. He had the potatoes to dig and the green peas to gather, but next morning he promised to come quite early and burn the whole lot. That night the boy slept in a different bedroom, and he had a new bunny to sleep with him. It was a splendid bunny, all white plush with real glass eyes, but the boy was too excited to care very much about it, for tomorrow he was going to the seaside, and that in itself was such a wonderful thing that he could think of nothing else. And while the boy was asleep, dreaming of the seaside, the little Rabbit lay among the old picture-books in the corner behind the fowl-house, and he felt very lonely. The sack had been left untied, and so by wriggling a bit he was able to get his head through the opening and look out. He was shivering a little, for he had always been used to sleeping in a proper bed, and by this time his coat had worn so thin and threadbare from hugging that it was no longer any protection to him. Near by he could see the thicket of raspberry canes, growing tall and close like a tropical jungle, in whose shadow he had played with the boy on bygone mornings. He thought of those long sunlit hours in the garden, how happy they were, and a great sadness came over him. He seemed to see them all pass before him, each more beautiful than the other, the fairy huts in the flower-bed, the quiet evenings in the wood when he lay in the bracken and the little ants ran over his paws, the wonderful day when he first knew that he was real. He thought of the Skin Horse, so wise and gentle, and all that he had told him. Of what use was it to be loved, and lose one's beauty, and become real, if it all ended like this? And a tear, a real tear, trickled down his little shabby velvet nose, and fell to the ground. And then a strange thing happened, for where the tear had fallen, a flower grew out of the ground, a mysterious flower, not at all like any that grew in the garden. It had slender green leaves the colour of emeralds, and in the centre of the leaves a blossom like a golden cup. It was so beautiful that the little Rabbit forgot to cry, and just lay there watching it. And presently the blossom opened, and out of it there stepped a fairy. She was quite the loveliest fairy in the whole world. Her dress was of pearl and dewdrops, and there were flowers round her neck and in her hair, and her face was like the most perfect flower of all. And she came close to the little Rabbit, and gathered him up in her arms, and kissed him on his velveteen nose that was all damp from crying. "Little Rabbit," she said, "don't you know who I am?" The Rabbit looked up at her, and it seemed to him that he had seen her face before, but he couldn't think where. "I am the nursery magic fairy," she said. "I take care of all the playthings that the children have loved. When they are old and worn out, and the children don't need them any more, then I come and take them away with me, and turn them into real." "Wasn't I real before?" asked the little Rabbit. "You were real to the boy," the fairy said, "because he loved you. Now you shall be real to everyone." And she held the little Rabbit close in her arms, and flew with him into the wood. It was light now, for the moon had risen. All the forest was beautiful, and the fronds of the bracken shone like frosted silver. In the open glade between the tree trunks the wild rabbits danced with their shadows on the velvet grass, but when they saw the fairy they all stopped dancing and stood round in a ring to stare at her. "I've brought you a new playfellow," the fairy said. "You must be very kind to him, and teach him all he needs to know in Rabbitland, for he is going to live with you for ever and ever." And she kissed the little Rabbit again, and put him down on the grass. "Run and play, little Rabbit," she said. But the little Rabbit sat quite still for a moment and never moved, for when he saw all the wild rabbits dancing around him he suddenly remembered about his hind legs, and he didn't want them to see that he was made all in one piece. He did not know that when the fairy kissed him that last time she had changed him altogether, and he might have sat there a long time, too shy to move, if just then something hadn't tickled his nose, and before he thought what he was doing, he lifted his hind toe to scratch it. And he found that he actually had hind legs. Instead of dingy velveteen he had brown fur, soft and shiny, his ears twitched by themselves, and his whiskers were so long that they brushed the grass. He gave one leap, and the joy of using those hind legs was so great that he went springing about the turf on them, jumping sideways and whirling round as the others did, and he grew so excited that when at last he did stop to look for the fairy, she had gone. He was a real rabbit at last, at home with the other rabbits. Autumn passed, and winter, and in the spring, when the days grew warm and sunny, the boy went out to play in the wood behind the house. And while he was playing, 2 rabbits crept out from the bracken and peeped at him. One of them was brown all over, but the other had strange markings under his fur, as though long ago he had been spotted, and the spots still showed through. And about his little soft nose and his round black eyes there was something familiar, so that the boy thought to himself, "Why, he looks just like my old Bunny, that was lost when I had scarlet fever." But he never knew that it really was his own Bunny, come back to look at the child who had first helped him to be real. End of The Velveteen Rabbit, by Marjorie Williams. Read by Elizabeth Klett. Dedicated to my daughter Miranda, August 2011.
The Story of the 3 Little Pigs, by Unknown. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. The Story of the 3 Little Pigs. Once upon a time there was an old sow with 3 little pigs, and as she had not enough to keep them, she sent them out to seek their fortune. The first that went off met a man with a bundle of straw, and said to him, "Please, man, give me that straw to build me a home," which the man did, and the little pig built a house with it. Presently came along a wolf, and knocked at the door, and said, little pig, let me come in." To which the pig answered, "No, no, by the hair of my chinny chin chin." "Then I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house in," said the wolf. So he huffed and he puffed and he blew his house in, and ate up the little pig. The second pig met a man with a bundle of furs, and said, "Please, man, give me that furs to build a house," which the man did, and the pig built his house. Then along came the wolf, and said, little pig, let me come in." "No, no, by the hair of my chinny chin chin." "Then I'll puff and I'll huff and I'll blow your house in." So he huffed and he puffed and he puffed and he huffed, and at last he blew the house down, and ate up the second little pig. The third little pig met a man with a load of bricks, and said, "Please, man, give me those bricks to build a house with." So the man gave him the bricks, and he built his house with them. So the wolf came, as he did to the other little pigs, and said, little pig, let me come in." "No, no, by the hair of my chinny chin chin." "Then I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house in." Well, he huffed and he puffed and he huffed and he puffed and he puffed and he huffed, but he could not get the house down. When he found that he could not, with all his huffing and puffing, blow the house down, he said, little pig, I know where there is a nice field of turnips." "Where?" said the little pig. "Oh, in Mr. Smith's home field, and if you will be ready tomorrow morning I will call for you, and we will go together and get some for dinner." "Very well," said the little pig, "I will be ready. What time do you mean to go?" "Oh, at 6 o'clock." Well, the little pig got up at 5, and got the turnips, and was home again before 6. When the wolf came, he said, "Little pig, are you ready?" "Ready?" said the little pig. "I have been and come back again, and got a nice pot full for dinner." The wolf felt very angry at this, but thought that he would be up to the little pig somehow or other. So he said, "Little pig, I know where there is a nice apple tree." "Where?" said the little pig. "Down at Merry Garden," replied the wolf, "and if you will not deceive me, I will come for you at 5 o'clock tomorrow, and we will go together and get some apples." Well, the little pig woke at 4 the next morning, and bustled up and went off for the apples, hoping to get back before the wolf came. But he had farther to go, and had to climb the tree, so that just as he was coming down from it, he saw the wolf coming. which, as you may suppose, frightened him very much. When the wolf came up, he said, "Little pig, what? Are you here before me? Are they nice apples?" "Yes, very," said the little pig. "I will throw you down one." And he threw it so far that whilst the wolf was gone to pick it up, the little pig jumped down and ran home. The next day the wolf came again, and said to the little pig, "Little pig, there is a fair in the town this afternoon. Will you go?" "Oh yes," said the pig, "I will go. What time shall you be ready?" "At 3," said the wolf. So the little pig went off before the time as usual, and got to the fair, and brought a butter churn, and was on his way home with it when he saw the wolf coming. Then he could not tell what to do. So he got into the churn to hide, and in doing so turned it round, and it began to roll, and rolled down the hill with the pig inside it, which frightened the wolf that he ran home without going to the fair. He went to the little pig's house, and told him how frightened he had been by a great round thing which came down the hill past him. Then the little pig said, "Ah, I frightened you, did I? I had been to the fair and brought a butter churn, and when I saw you I got into it and rolled down the hill." Then the wolf was very angry indeed, and declared he would eat up the little pig, and that he would get down the chimney after him. When the little pig saw what he was about, he hung on the pot full of water, and made up a blazing fire just as the wolf was coming down, took off the cover of the pot, and in fell the wolf, and the little pig put on the cover again in an instant, boiled him up and ate him for supper, and lived happily ever after. End of The Story of the Three Little Pigs by Unknown.
Peter Rabbit by Beatrice Potter. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Once upon a time there were 4 little rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sand bank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. "Now, my dears," said old Mrs. Rabbit one morning, "you may go into the fields or down the lane, but don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there. He was put in a pie by Mrs. McGregor. Now run along and don't get into mischief. I am going out." Then old Mrs. Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella, and went through the wood to the baker's. She bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, who were good little bunnies, went down the lane to gather blackberries. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight away to Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. First he ate some lettuces and some French beans, and then he ate some radishes. And then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some parsley. But round the end of a cucumber frame who should he meet but Mr. McGregor. Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees planting out young cabbages, but he jumped up and ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling out, "Stop, thief!" Peter was most dreadfully frightened. He rushed all over the garden, for he had forgotten the way back to the gate. He lost one of his shoes among the cabbages, and the other shoe among the potatoes. After losing them, he ran on 4 legs and went faster, so that I think he might have got away altogether if he had not unfortunately run into a gooseberry net and got caught by the large buttons on his jacket. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons, quite new. Peter gave himself up for lost and shed big tears, but his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows, who flew to him in great excitement and implored him to exert himself. Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve, which he intended to pop upon the top of Peter, but Peter wriggled out just in time, leaving his jacket behind him, and rushed into the tool shed and jumped into a can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in if it had not had so much water in it. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hidden underneath a flower pot. He began to turn them over carefully, looking under each. Presently Peter sneezed. "Kerchoo!" Mr. McGregor was after him in no time, and tried to put his foot upon Peter, who jumped out of a window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter. He went back to his work. Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath and trembling with fright, and he had not the least idea which way to go. Also, he was very damp with sitting in that can. After a time he began to wander about, going lippity, lippity, not very fast, and looking all around. He found a door in a wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a fat little rabbit to squeeze underneath. An old mouse was running in and out over the stone doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family in the wood. Peter asked her the way to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth that she could not answer. She only shook her head at him. Peter began to cry. Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. Presently he came to a pond, where Mr. McGregor filled his water cans. A white cat was staring at some goldfish. She sat very, very still, but now and then the tip of her tail twitched as if it were alive. Peter thought it best to go away without speaking to her. He had heard about cats from his cousin, little Benjamin Bunny. He went back towards the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close to him, he heard the noise of a hoe. Scritch, scratch, scratch, scritch. Peter scuttered underneath the bushes, but presently, as nothing happened, he came out and climbed upon a wheelbarrow and peeped over. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. His back was turned towards Peter, and beyond him was the gate. Peter got down very quietly off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could along a straight walk behind some black-currant bushes. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but Peter did not care. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe at last in the wood outside the garden. Mr. McGregor hung up the little jacket and the shoes for a scarecrow to frighten the blackbirds. Peter never stopped running or looking behind him till he got home to the big fir tree. He was so tired that he flopped down upon the nice soft sand on the floor of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking. She wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a fortnight. I am sorry to say that Peter was not very well during the evening. His mother put him to bed and made some chamomile tea, and she gave a dose of it to Peter, 1 tablespoon to be taken at bedtime. But Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail had bread and milk and blackberries for supper. The end. End of Peter Rabbit by Beatrice Potter. Read by Phil Chenevert. The Story of Little Black Sambo by Helen Bannerman. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Story of Little Black Sambo. Once upon a time there was a little black boy, and his name was Little Black Sambo. And his mother was called Black Mumbo, and his father was called Black Jumbo. And Black Mumbo made him a beautiful little red coat and a pair of beautiful little blue trousers. And Black Jumbo went to the bazaar and bought him a beautiful green umbrella and a lovely little pair of purple shoes with crimson soles and crimson linings. And then wasn't Little Black Sambo grand? So he put on all his fine clothes and went out for a walk in the jungle. And by he met a tiger, and the tiger said to him, "Little Black Sambo, I'm going to eat you up." And Little Black Sambo said, "Oh, please, Mr. Tiger, don't eat me up. I'll give you my beautiful little red coat." So the tiger said, "Very well, I won't eat you this time, but you must give me your beautiful little red coat." So the tiger got poor Little Black Sambo's beautiful little red coat and went away, saying, "Now I'm the grandest tiger in the jungle." And Little Black Sambo went on, and by he met another tiger, and it said to him, "Little Black Sambo, I'm going to eat you up." And Little Black Sambo said, "Oh, please, Mr. Tiger, don't eat me up, and I'll give you my beautiful little blue trousers." So the Tiger said, "Very well, I won't eat you this time, but you must give me your beautiful little blue trousers." So the Tiger got poor Little Black Sambo's beautiful little blue trousers, and went away saying, "Now I'm the grandest tiger in the jungle." And Little Black Sambo went on, and by he met another tiger, and it said to him, "Little Black Sambo, I'm going to eat you up." And Little Black Sambo said, "Oh, please, Mr. Tiger, don't eat me up, and I'll give you my beautiful little purple shoes with crimson soles and crimson linings." But the Tiger said, "What use would your shoes be to me? I've got 4 feet, and you've only got 2. You haven't got enough shoes for me." But Little Black Sambo said, "You could wear them on your ears." "So I could," said the Tiger. "That's a very good idea. Give them to me, and I won't eat you this time." So the Tiger got poor Little Black Sambo's beautiful little purple shoes with crimson soles and crimson linings, and went away saying, "Now I'm the grandest tiger in the jungle." And by Little Black Sambo met another tiger, and it said to him, "Little Black Sambo, I'm going to eat you up." And Little Black Sambo said, "Oh, please, Mr. Tiger, don't eat me up, and I'll give you my beautiful green umbrella." But the Tiger said, "How can I carry an umbrella when I need all my paws for walking with?" "You could tie a knot on your tail and carry it that way," said Little Black Sambo. "So I could," said the Tiger. "Give it to me, and I won't eat you this time." So he got poor Little Black Sambo's beautiful green umbrella, and went away saying, "Now I'm the grandest tiger in the jungle." And poor Little Black Sambo went away crying, because the cruel tigers had taken all his fine clothes. Presently he heard a horrible noise that sounded like "Grrrr," and it got louder and louder. "Oh, dear," said Little Black Sambo, "there are all the tigers coming back to eat me up. What shall I do?" So he ran quickly to a palm tree and peeped around it to see what the matter was. And there he saw all the tigers fighting and disputing which of them was the grandest, and at last they all got so angry that they jumped up and took off all the fine clothes, and began to tear each other with their claws, and bite each other with their great big white teeth. And they came rolling and tumbling right to the foot of the very tree where Little Black Sambo was hiding. But he jumped quickly in behind the umbrella, and the tigers all caught hold of each other's tails as they wrangled and scrambled, and so they found themselves in a ring around the tree. Then, when the tigers were very wee and very far away, Little Black Sambo jumped up and called out, "Oh, tigers, why have you taken off all your nice clothes? Don't you want them any more?" But the tigers only answered, "Arr!" Then Little Black Sambo said, "If you want them, say so, or I'll take them away." But the tigers would not let go of each other's tails, and so they could only say, "Arr!" So Little Black Sambo put on all his fine clothes again and walked off. And the tigers were very, very angry, but still they would not let go of each other's tails. And they were so angry that they ran round the tree trying to eat each other up, and they ran faster and faster till they were whirling round so fast that you couldn't see their legs at all. And they still ran faster and faster and faster till they all just melted away, and there was nothing left but a great big pool of melted butter round the foot of the tree. Now Black Jumbo was just coming home from his work with a great big brass pot in his arms, and when he saw what was left of all the tigers, he said, "Oh, what lovely melted butter! I'll take that home to Black Mumbo for her to cook with." So he put it all into the great big brass pot, and took it home to Black Mumbo to cook with. When Black Mumbo saw the melted butter, wasn't she pleased! "Now," said she, "we'll all have pancakes for supper." So she got flour and eggs and milk and sugar and butter, and she made a huge plate of most lovely pancakes, and she fried them in the melted butter which the tigers had made, and they were just as yellow and brown as little tigers. And when they all sat down to supper, and Black Mumbo ate 27 pancakes, and Black Jumbo ate 57, but Little Black Sambo ate 169, because he was so hungry. End of The Story of Little Black Sambo by Helen Bannerman, read by Phil Chenevert. The Rocket Book by Peter Newell. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Basement. When Fritz the janitor's bad kid went snooping in the basement, he found a rocket snugly hid beneath the window casement. He struck a match with one fell swoop, then on the concrete kneeling, he lit the rocket and oop! It shot up through the ceiling. First flat. The Steiners on the floor above of breakfast were partaking. Crash came the rocket unannounced, and set them all a-quaking. It smote a catsup bottle fair, and bang, the thing exploded, and now these people all declare that catsup flask was loaded. Second flat. Before the fire, old Grandpa Hupp dozed in his armchair big, when from a trunk the rocket burst and carried off his wig. It passed so near his ancient head, he roused up with a start, and turning to his grandson said, "You fellows think you're smart." Third flat. Algernon Brackett, somewhat rash, had blown a monster bubble, when oh, there came a blinding flash, precipitating trouble. But Algy turned in mild disgust, and called to Mama Brackett, "Say, did you hear that bubble burst? It made an awful racket." Fourth flat. Joe Budd, who'd bought a potted plant, was dousing it with water. He fancied this would make it grow, and Joseph loved to potter. Then through the pot the rocket shot, and made the scene look sickly. "Well now," said Joe, "I never thought that plant would shoot so quickly." Fifth flat. Right here 'tis needful to remark that Dick and Little Son were playing with a Noah's Ark, and having loads of fun, when all at once that rocket stout up through the ark came blazing. The animals were tossed about, and did some stunts amazing. Sixth flat. A burglar on the next floor up the sideboard was exploring. The family with the brindle pup were still asleep and snoring. Just then up through the silverware the rocket thundered, flaring. The burglar got a dreadful scare, then out the door went tearing. Seventh flat. Miss Mamie Briggs, with no mean skill, was playing Casey's Fling to please her cousin Amos Gill, who liked that sort of thing, when suddenly the rocket hot the old piano jumbled. It stopped that ragtime like a shot, then through the ceiling rumbled. Eighth flat. Up through the next floor on its way that rocket dread went tearing, where Wilkie stood in bathrobe gay, a tepid bath preparing. The tub it punctured like a shot, and made a mighty splashing. The man was rooted to the spot, then out the door went dashing. Ninth flat. Bob Brooks was puffing very hard his football to inflate, while round him stood his faithful guard, and they could hardly wait. Then came the rocket, fierce and bright, and through the football rumbled. "You've got a pair of lungs, all right," his staring playmates grumbled. Tenth flat. The family dog, with frenzied mien, was chasing Fluff the Mouser, when poof the rocket flashed between, and quite astonished Towser. Now, if this dog had wit enough the English tongue to torture, he might have growled such silly stuff as, "Whew, that cat's a scorcher." 11th flat. While Carrie Cook sat with a book, the phonograph played sweetly. Then came the rocket, and it smashed that instrument completely. Fair Carrie promptly turned her head, attracted by the roar. "Dear me, I've never heard," she said, "that record played before." 12th flat. De Vere was searching for a match to light a cigarette, but failed to find one with dispatch, which threw him in a pet. Just then the rocket flared up bright before his face and crackled, supplying him the needed light. "Thanks awfully," he cackled. 13th flat. Home from the shop came Maud's new hat, a hat of monstrous size. It almost filled the tiny flat before her ravished eyes. When shoop up through the box so proud, the rocket flared and spluttered. "I said that hat was all too loud," her peevish husband muttered. 14th flat. Tom's pap had helped him start his train, and all would have been fine had not the rocket, raising Cain, blocked traffic on the line. It blew the engine into scrap, as in a fit of passion. "Who would have thought that toy," said pap, "would blow up in such fashion?" 15th flat. Orlando Pease, quite at his ease, the Morning Star was reading. "My dear," said he to Mrs. Pease, "here's a report worth heeding." The rocket then, in wanton sport, flashed through the printed pages. The lady gasped, "A wild report!" then swooned by easy stages. 16th flat. Doc Danby was a stupid guy, so lest he sleep too late, he placed a tattoo clock nearby to waken him at 8. But the rocket smote that clock and smashed its way clean through it. "You have a fine alarm," said Doc, "but say, you overdo it." 17th flat. A penny liner, Abram Stout, was writing a description. The flame shot up, he pounded out, then threw a mild conniption. For through his Flemington there shied a rocket hot and mystic. "I didn't mean to be," he cried, "so deuced realistic." 18th flat. Gus Gummer long had set his head upon some strange invention. "Be careful, Gus," his good wife said, "it might explode, I mention." Just then the pesky rocket flared and wrecked that Yankee notion. "I feared as much," his wife declared, then fainted from emotion. 19th flat. While Bert was on his hobby horse and riding it like mad, the rocket on its fiery course upset the startled lad. The frightened pony plunged a lot, like Fury playing tag. "Whoa, Spot," said Bert, "who would have thought you such a fiery nag?" 20th flat. A taxidermist plied his trade upon a walrus's head. It really made him quite afraid to meet its stare so dread. When suddenly the rocket, bright, flared up and then was off. "Oh, Minnie," cried the man in fright, "just hear that walrus cough!" Top flat. Oh, it was just a splendid flight, that rocket's wild career, but to an end it came all right, as you shall straightway hear. It plunged into a can of cream that Billy Bunk was freezing, and froze quite stiff, as it would seem, and so subsided, wheezing. End of the Rocket Book, by Peter Newell. Read by Phil Chenevert. The Slant Book, by Peter Newell. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Slant Book. Where Bobby lives, there is a hill so steep and high, 'twould fill the bill for Jack and Jill their famous act to try. Once Bobby's go-cart broke away, and down this hill it kited. The careless nurse screamed in dismay, but Bobby was delighted. He clapped his hands in manner rude, and laughed in high elation, while close behind the nurse pursued in hopeless consternation. An officer slid off the lid as Bobby hove in sight, and bellowed out, "You're scorching, kid, I'll run you in all right." But down the go-cart swiftly sped and smashed that cop completely, and as he sailed o'er Bobby's head, Bob snipped a button neatly. A funny son of sunny grease was standing near the curb, beside his push-cart wrapped in peace that naught could well disturb. But all at once he got a shock. The go-cart, speeding down, collided with his fancy stock and littered up the town. The runaway then swerved a bit and snapped a hydrant short, which accident proved quite a hit, of rather novel sort. The water spouted in a jet as much as 10 feet high, and all were soaked and nearly choked who chanced to be nearby. A farmer's wife, Miss Angie Moore, was trudging up the grade. A basket full of eggs she bore to barter with in trade. The go-cart and the lady met, informally no doubt, and made a sort of omelette and spread it round about. A painter, on a ladder perched, was working at his calling. Against his foot the go-cart lurched and sent the fellow sprawling. His pot of paint came tumbling down, and wrong side up it settled about a chappie's flaxen crown. Oh my, but he was nettled! A German band across the street its way was slowly wending, which was a movement indiscreet, the way that things were tending. The go-cart struck the bass drum square and passed completely through it. The drummer madly tore his hair and said, "Why did you do it?" Some workmen were putting in a heavy plate glass front. The go-cart then came rushing in and did its little stunt. It smashed to bits a crystal pane 2 sweating men were bearing, and sped on down the slanting plane and left them mad and swearing. An automobile, big and brown, was chugging up the hill, and met the go-cart plunging down with speed that boded ill. At once there rose a noise and din of people in dismay. A sandwich man then butted in and opened up a way. A lad was rushing with a hat some lady had been buying. The go-cart caught and laid him flat and sent the hat box flying. The hat fell out and settled down upon our Bobby's head. "Say, I'm the swellest kid in town," the precious rascal said. A newsboy next was somehow hit. The go-cart, swift and dexterous, contrived to muss him up a bit and fill the air with extras. One copy Bobby neatly scooped, and saw this wild display in type so bold it fairly whooped, "A go-cart breaks away!" Then as the go-cart speeded by, a bulldog, quite pugnacious, seized on the handle on the fly and clung with grip tenacious. The go-cart's speed was so increased the dog streamed out behind it, and Bobby turned to pet the beast, which didn't seem to mind it. Perambulating down the street was Miss Lucy O'Grady. The go-cart knocked her off her feet and took on board the lady. "Your fare," said Bobby with a shout, one chubby hand extending, but Miss O'Grady tumbled out with shrieks the heavens rending. A herder up the weary grade a yearling calf was leading. The creature was a stubborn jade, and lunged about unheeding. The go-cart caught the rope midway between the calf and herder, and both fell in behind the shay with cries of "Bah!" and "Murder!" 2 chappies at a tennis meet were battling fast and hard. The go-cart skidded off the street and shot across the yard. The game was 40 all, but then it didn't end that day. The go-cart dashed into the net and carried it away. On came the go-cart down the grade. The town was now behind it, and ran into an orchard's shade where Providence resigned it. But then it only grazed a tree and set it all a-shiver. The ripened fruit fell merrily, and likewise Sammy's silver. Then through a watermelon patch this awful cart descended, and split the melons by the batch. The farmer was offended, and tried to stop its wild career, which was a silly notion. It passed him promptly to the rear with quite a rapid motion. A picnic party on the green were seated at their lunch. The go-cart dashed upon the scene and threw the happy bunch. Sardines and pickles, ham and cake were jumbled in a mess. Then straightway rose these picnickers and shouted for redress. An artist sketching on the slope a lively air was humming, and so absorbed was he failed to note the go-cart coming. A crash! The circumambient air was filled with miscellany, and damaged quite beyond repair was Kremit's white Mulvaney. A damsel milked a brindled cow out in a pasture green. The birdies sang from bush and bough, all nature was serene, when suddenly a thunderbolt dispelled the sweet illusion. The go-cart gave the twain a jolt, and all was wild confusion. Upon a rustic bridge a chap cast out a bait inviting, and presently he took a nap and dreamed the fish were biting. Then came the go-cart like a gale, and rudely him awakened. At first he thought he'd caught a whale, but found he was mistaken. The longest night must have an end as well as a beginning, and so this cart, you may depend, was bound to cease its spinning. It crashed into a hemlock stump that chanced to block its way, and Bobby made a flying jump and landed in the hay. End of the Slant Book. Recorded by Phil Chenevert.
Mother West Wind Howe Stories by Thornton W. Burgess. How Old Mr. Toad Learned to Sing. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Peter Rabbit never will forget how he laughed the first time he heard old Mr. Toad say that he could sing and was going to sing. Why, Peter would as soon think of singing himself, and that is something he can no more do than he can fly. Peter had known old Mr. Toad ever since he could remember. He was rather fond of him, even if he did play jokes on him once in a while. But he always thought of old Mr. Toad as one of the homeliest of all his friends, slow, awkward, and too commonplace to be very interesting. So when, in the glad joyousness of the spring, old Mr. Toad had told Jimmy Skunk that he was going down to the Smiling Pool to sing, because without him the great chorus there would lack one of its sweetest voices, Peter and Jimmy had laughed till the tears came. A few days later, Peter happened over to the Smiling Pool for a call on Grandfather Frog. A mighty chorus of joy from unseen singers rose from all about the Smiling Pool. Peter knew about those singers. They were Hylas, the little cousins of Sticky Toes the Tree Toad. Peter sat very still on the edge of the bank, trying to see one of them. Suddenly he became aware of a new note, one he never had noticed before, and sweeter than any of the others. Indeed, it was one of the sweetest of all the spring songs, as sweet as the love notes of Tommy Tit the Chickadee, than which there is none sweeter. It seemed to come from the shallow water just in front of Peter, and he looked eagerly for the singer. Then his eyes opened until it seemed as if they would pop right out of his head, and he dropped his lower jaw foolishly. There was old Mr. Toad, with a queer bag Peter never had seen before swelled out under his chin, and as surely as Peter was sitting on that bank, it was old Mr. Toad who was the sweet singer. Old Mr. Toad paid no attention to Peter, not even when he was spoken to. He was so absorbed in his singing that he just didn't hear. Peter sat there a while to listen. Then he called Jimmy Skunk and Unc' Billy Possum, who were also listening to the music, and they were just as surprised as Peter. Then he spied Jerry Muskrat at the other end of the Smiling Pool and hurried over there. Peter was so full of the discovery he had made that he could think of nothing else. He fairly ached to tell. "Jerry!" he cried. "Oh, Jerry Muskrat! Do you know that old Mr. Toad can sing?" Jerry looked surprised that Peter should ask such a question.
Of course I know it, said he. It would be mighty funny if I didn't know it, seeing that he is the sweetest singer in the Smiling Pool and has sung here every spring since I can remember.
Peter looked very much chagrined.
I didn't know it until just now, he confessed. I didn't believe him when he told me that he could sing. I wonder how he ever learned. He didn't learn any more than you learned how to jump, replied Jerry. It just came to him naturally. His father sang, and his grandfather, and his great-grandfather
way back to the beginning of things. I thought everybody knew about that." "I don't. Tell me about it. Please do, Jerry," begged Peter. "All right, I will," replied Jerry good-naturedly. "It's something you ought to know about anyway. In the first place, Old Mr. Toad belongs to a very old and honorable family, one of the very oldest. I've heard say that it goes way back almost to the very beginning of things, when there wasn't much land. Anyway, the first Toad, the great, great, ever so great grandfather of old Mr. Toad, and own cousin to the great, great, ever so great grandfather of Grandfather Frog, was one of the first to leave the water for the dry land. Old Mother Nature met him hopping along and making hard work of it because, of course, it was so new. She looked at him sharply. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. "Aren't you contented with the water where you were born?" Mr. Toad bowed very low. "Yes'm," said he very humbly. "I'll go right back there if you say so. I thought there must be some things worth finding out on the land, and that I might be of some use in the great world." His answer pleased Old Mother Nature. She was worried. She had planted all kinds of things on the land, and they were springing up everywhere. But she had discovered that bugs of many kinds liked the tender green things and were increasing so fast and were so greedy that they threatened to strip the land of all that she had planted. She had so many things to attend to that she hadn't time to take care of the bugs. "If you truly want to be of some use," said she, "you can attend to some of those bugs." Mr. Toad went right to work, and Old Mother Nature went about some other business. Having so many other things to look after, she quite forgot about Mr. Toad, and it was several weeks before she came that way again. Right in the middle of a great bare place where the bugs had eaten everything was a beautiful green spot. And patiently hopping from plant to plant was Mr. Toad, snapping up every bug he could see. He didn't see Old Mother Nature and kept right on working. She watched him a while as he hopped from plant to plant, catching bugs as fast as he could. And then she spoke. "Have you stayed right here ever since I last saw you?" she asked. Mr. Toad gave a start of surprise. "Yes'm," said he. "But I thought you wanted to see the Great World and learn things," said she. Mr. Toad looked a little embarrassed. "So I did," he replied, "but I wanted to be of some use, and the bugs have kept me so busy there was no time to travel. Besides, I have learned a great deal right here. I couldn't get around fast enough to save all the plants, but I have saved what I could." Old Mother Nature was more pleased than she was willing to show, for Mr. Toad was the first of all the little people who had tried to help her, and he had done what he could willingly and faithfully. "I suppose," said she, speaking a little gruffly, "you expect me to reward you." Mr. Toad looked surprised and a little hurt. "I don't want any reward," said he. "I didn't do it for that. It will be reward enough to know that I really have helped and to be allowed to continue to help." At that Old Mother Nature's face lighted with one of her most beautiful smiles. "Mr. Toad," said she, "if you could have just what you want, what would it be?" Mr. Toad hesitated a few minutes and then said shyly, "A beautiful voice." It was Old Mother Nature's turn to look surprised. "A beautiful voice?" she exclaimed. "Pray, why do you want a beautiful voice?" "So that I can express my happiness in the most beautiful way I know of, by singing," replied Mr. Toad. "You shall have it," declared Old Mother Nature, "but not all the time, lest you be tempted to forget your work, which you know is the real source of true happiness. In the spring of each year you shall go back to your home in the water, and there for a time you shall sing to your heart's content, and there shall be no sweeter voice than yours." Sure enough, when the next spring came, Mr. Toad was filled with a great longing to go home. When he got there, he found that in his throat was a little music bag, and when he swelled it out, he had one of the sweetest voices in the world. And so it has been ever since with the Toad family. Old Mr. Toad is one of the sweetest singers in the Smiling Pool. But when it is time to go back to work, he never grumbles, but is one of the most faithful workers in Mother Nature's garden," concluded Jerry Muskrat. Peter sighed. "I never could work," said he. "Perhaps that is why I cannot sing." "Very likely," replied Jerry Muskrat, quite forgetting that he cannot sing himself, although he is a great worker. End of Mother West Wind Howe Stories by Thornton W. Burgess. How Old Mr. Toad Learned to Sing, read by Antoinette Griffin. www.storieswithantoinette.com.
The Twin Sisters by Johnny Gruelle. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. Recording by Ginger Kukolo. The Twin Sisters. Everybody in the little village called them the twin houses because they were built exactly alike. But the two little cottages looked different even if they were built alike. For one was covered with climbing vines and beautiful scarlet roses, while the other had no vines or flowers about it at all. Everybody called the two cottages the twin houses for another reason. The owners were twins. One of the twins was Matilda and the other Katrinka, and they were as much alike on the outside as their two cottages were alike. But as their two cottages differed, so did the two twins differ. Matilda could not be told from Katrinka should you just see them walking down the street. But the minute either of them spoke, you would know which was Matilda and which was Katrinka. Matilda, who lived in the bear cottage, was sour and disagreeable, while Katrinka was happy and cheery. So the people in the little village called Matilda Matilda Grouch, and they called Katrinka Katrinka Sunshine. All the children of the little village loved Katrinka, for she always had a cookie or a dainty in her apron pocket to give them, or she would pat them on their curly heads and smile cheerily at them through her glasses. And all the children avoided Matilda, for, sometimes mistaking her for Katrinka and running close to greet her, they would have their noses tweaked for their trouble. Matilda's life was lonely and cold. No one went to see her. She was always unhappy. Katrinka's house always echoed with the laughter of children. Everyone went to see her. She was always joyful and cheery. One night while Matilda sat at her dark window, looking across at Katrinka's house, she saw a crowd of people tiptoeing up to the stoop with baskets under their arms and flowers in their hands, and when all had crowded upon the porch, they stamped their feet and made a great noise. Matilda was very angry, but Katrinka ran laughing to the door and greeted all with her kindliest smile. It was a surprise party for Katrinka, for it was her birthday. Matilda watched the party from her dark window, and the longer she watched, the more angry she grew. For the longer the party lasted, the louder grew the happy laughter. Finally, when all the guests had gone, Matilda saw Katrinka gather up half the presents and put them in a basket. Then Katrinka stole softly up to Matilda's stoop and stamped her feet. Matilda sat scowling by the dark window a long time before she finally went to the door, for she was very peevish. "This is a fine time to come stamping upon a person's stoop," she scolded as Katrinka walked into the living room. "Oh, sister," Katrinka cried as she tried to kiss Matilda, "this is our birthday, and I have brought you half of the presents which were given me. See?" And she piled the presents high upon the table. "I do not wish them," said Matilda, frowning at her sister. But Katrinka could see that Matilda did wish them. "The presents were not for me, Katrinka," she said. "Oh, yes, they are," Katrinka replied. "They were given to me, and I give them to you. I have saved one half for myself, but you should have been to the party," said Katrinka. "We had such a happy time." "I do not enjoy being with people," Matilda scolded. "I wish to be left to myself." "Yes, Matilda," her sister said, "you do not know the happiness in being kind and friendly to others." "Pooh!" sniffed Matilda. "I just wish you could take my place and know the happiness that is in my heart tonight," Katrinka smiled. "I just wish you could take my place and know the unhappiness that is in my heart tonight," said Matilda. "You would see that a lot of children screeching about the house with all their presents could not bring me happiness." Katrinka thought for a moment. "I have it, Matilda. We will change places. You must live in my house and pretend that you are me, and I will live in your house and pretend that I am you, and you must smile and be friendly just as I would do." After a great deal of coaxing, Matilda finally agreed that she would change places with Katrinka and try to smile when anyone came to see her. "But only for 3 days," she said. So Matilda went over to Katrinka's cottage and went to bed, and Katrinka stayed in Matilda's cottage, but she did not go to bed. Instead, she went all over the house and tidied everything up, and placed pretty white curtains on the windows. In the morning, neighbors came to Katrinka's house, and Matilda, taking Katrinka's place, met them with a smile. And soon, in spite of herself, she was laughing and enjoying herself. And when they left, Matilda felt that she enjoyed having them there. But what was the caller's surprise when they passed Matilda's cottage to see someone planting flowers around the stoop? They stopped in wonderment, and as Katrinka looked up at them with a cheery "Good morning" and a happy smile, they could scarce believe their eyes and ears, for they thought it was Matilda. And these callers told other neighbors, and they called at Katrinka's house and visited with Matilda, and Matilda was so pleased she laughed as cheerily as Katrinka could laugh. And as the neighbors left, they saw Katrinka in Matilda's front yard planting flowers, and stopped in open-mouthed wonder to gaze at her, for they thought she was Matilda. And when Katrinka smiled at them and said cheerily, "Good morning," they could scarcely believe their eyes and ears. The neighbors all put their heads together, and that evening they filled their baskets with goodies and presents, and, with large bouquets of flowers, they tipped up to Matilda's front stoop and stamped their feet. Now Katrinka had called Matilda over to her own house to see the changes she had made, and Matilda was beginning to see what she had missed all along. And as they were talking, there came a noise at the front stoop. "Shall I go to the door, Matilda?" asked Katrinka. "No, I will go, Katrinka," Matilda replied, her face alight with happiness. So Matilda welcomed her guest as cheerily as Katrinka had done the evening before, and the laughter lasted until way in the night. And when the last guest had left, Matilda took Katrinka in her arms and said, "I will not need to change places with you again, Katrinka, for I have found that there is far more pleasure in being happy than in being unhappy." "Of course there is, Matilda," Katrinka replied. "You see, in order to be happy ourselves, we must reflect happiness to others, and the more cheer we give to others, the more joy we receive ourselves. So we must continue to change from one house to another every day, so that no one will know which of us is Matilda and which is Katrinka, and we will share our happiness with each other." So Matilda's house was soon surrounded with beautiful flowers, and her house echoed with the fun and laughter of happy children. And the two sisters, who looked alike now, acted alike and could not be told apart. And they changed about so often people never knew whether they were visiting Katrinka or whether they were visiting Matilda, for one was as cheery as the other and was as happy in the love of all the people in the little village. And as they could not be told apart, everyone called Matilda or Katrinka the cheery twins whenever they spoke of either. End of The Twin Sisters. Recorded by Ginger Kukalo, Washington, D.C.
Hercules and the Wagoner. From the Aesop for Children by Aesop. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Hercules and the Wagoner. A farmer was driving his wagon along a miry country road after a heavy rain. The horses could hardly drag the load through the deep mud, and at last came to a standstill when one of the wheels sank to the hub in a rut. The farmer climbed down from his seat and stood beside the wagon looking at it, but without making the least effort to get it out of the rut. All he did was to curse his bad luck and call loudly on Hercules to come to his aid. Then, it is said, Hercules really did appear, saying, "Put your shoulder to the wheel, man, and urge on your horses. Do you think you can move the wagon by simply looking at it and whining about it? Hercules will not help unless you make some effort to help yourself." And when the farmer put his shoulder to the wheel and urged on the horses, the wagon moved very readily, and soon the farmer was riding along in great content and with a good lesson learned. Self-help is the best help. Heaven helps those who help themselves. End of Hercules and the Wagoner, from the Aesop for Children. Read by Kelly Akridge. The Wolf and the Kid. A fable from the Aesop for Children by Aesop. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. The Wolf and the Kid. There was once a little kid whose growing horns made him think he was a grown-up billy goat and able to take care of himself. So one evening, when the flock started home from the pasture and his mother called, the kid paid no heed and kept right on nibbling the tender grass. A little later, when he lifted his head, the flock was gone. He was all alone. The sun was sinking. Long shadows came creeping over the ground. A chilly little wind came creeping with them, making scary noises in the grass. The kid shivered as he thought of the terrible wolf. Then he started wildly over the field, bleating for his mother, but not halfway, near a clump of trees, there was the wolf. The kid knew there was little hope for him. "Please, Mr. Wolf," he said, trembling, "I know you are going to eat me, but first please pipe me a tune, for I want to dance and be merry as long as I can." The wolf liked the idea of a little music before eating, so he struck up a merry tune, and the kid leaped and frisked gaily. Meanwhile, the flock was moving slowly homeward. In the still evening air, the wolf's piping carried far. The shepherd dogs pricked up their ears. They recognized the song the wolf sings before a feast, and in a moment they were racing back to the pasture. The wolf's song ended suddenly, and as he ran, with the dogs at his heels, he called himself a fool for turning piper to please a kid, when he should have stuck to his butcher's trade. Do not let anything turn you from your purpose. End of The Wolf and the Kid, from the Aesop for Children by Aesop. Read by Kelly Akridge.
Baseball ABC by McLaughlin Brothers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A stands for Arthur, a boy fond of fun. When baseball he plays, none like him can run. B stands for ball, for bat, and for base. C stands for catcher, with mask on his face. D stands for diamond, drawn flat on the ground. E stands for Edward, who marks out the bound. F stands for fowl, on which Arthur goes out. G stands for go, how the merry boys shout. H stands for highball, knocked up to the sky. I stands for innings, for which we all try. J stands for judgment, the base keepers shout. K stands for Carl, who so quickly gets out. L stands for left field, who catches fly balls. M stands for muff, who cannot catch at all. N stands for Norman, who knocks the ball high. O stands for out when it's caught on the fly. P stands for pitcher, a smart boy you see. Q stands for quick, which this pitcher must be. R stands for runner, who runs to each base. S stands for shortstop, the ball he must chase. T stands for third base, looked after by James. U stands for umpire, who judges these games. V stands for Victor, the best of the 9. W stands for William, who tells us the time. X stands for scorecard, which errors point out. Y stands for youth, who's been injured, no doubt. Z stands for Zeno, this boy rather tall, who thinks there's no fun like a game of baseball. End of Baseball ABC by McLaughlin Brothers, read by Phil Chenevert.